A very good day I bid to one and all, especially to Dr. Revati. I hope everyone is in the ping of health. My name is Sharia Hafizi Ryan bin Zainuddin, and for today, my group will be presenting our assignment 1, which is the critical analysis of a novel. The novel that we have chosen is The Great Gatsby, and my group consists of 5 students, including myself. The other students are Sharmita Shini, Muhammad Sharul, Cornelia Anting, and Damia Elman. Without further ado, I will start the presentation and I will be talking about the synopsis of the novel. In the summer of 1922, Nick Carraway, a young guy from Minnesota, traveled to New York to study bond trading. He rented a house on Long Island West Egg District, a wealthy but old-fashioned community where the new affluent, a group of newly profitable enterprises, created a social network. Society liked to show off their affluence. Nick's West Egg neighbor is a mysterious guy named Jay Gatsby, who live in a massive Gothic home and throw extravagant parties every Saturday night. Nick is not like the other West Egg inhabitants. He attended Yale and grew up on East Egg, a fancy Long Island area populated by a long-established upper class, or what we know as old money. Nick drove to East Egg one night for supper with his cousin, Daisy Buchanan, and her husband, Nick, old Yale classmate. Daisy and Tom introduced Nick to Jordan Baker, a jaded but beautiful young lady, and Nick began a love involvement with her. Nick also discovered more about Daisy and Tom's marriage. Jordan informed him that Tom has a sweetheart named Myrtle Wilson, who lives in Ash Valley, a grey industrial dump halfway between West Egg and New York. Nick flies to New York with Tom and Myrtle shortly after this revelation. Myrtle began mocking Tom about Daisy at a raucous and colorful party at the flat Tom was retaining for the guests, to which Tom replied by smashing her nose. Soon, Nick received an invitation to Gatsby party. At the party, he meets Jordan Baker and they both meet Gatsby, a shockingly youthful man who talks with an English accent, has a fantastic grin, and refers to everyone as Old Spot. Gatsby requests to talk with Jordan alone, and it is via Jordan that Nick learned about his mystery neighbor. Gatsby informed Jordan that he met Daisy in 1917 in Louisville and fell in love with her. Gatsby's extravagant lifestyle and wild party are all a ruse to impress Daisy. Next, Daisy accepts Nick's invitation to tea at his house without knowing that Gatsby will also be present. Soon after, Tom starts to have a doubt about his wife's friendship with Gatsby. Gatsby glances at Daisy with such public fascination while having lunch with the Buchanan that makes Tom knows Gatsby is in love with her. He persuades the gang to travel to New York, where he meets Gatsby in a room at the Plaza Hotel. Tom believes that he and Daisy have a history that Gatsby will never comprehend, and he tells his wife that Gatsby is a criminal who makes his money through smuggling and other illegal operations. Daisy recognizes that her allegiance is to Tom, and Tom sends her back to East Egg with Gatsby, ostensibly to prove that Gatsby is incapable of harming him. As Nick, Jordan, and Tom drive through Ash Valley, they notice Gatsby's car has crashed, killing Tom's lover, Myrtle. They rush to Long Island, where Nick learned from Gatsby that Daisy was behind the wheel when she hit Myrtle, but Gatsby refuses to accept responsibility. Tom informed Myrtle's husband, George, the next day that Gatsby was the driver of the car. George, convinced that the driver of the car that killed Myrtle was Daisy's lover, tracked down Gatsby in the mansion swimming pool and shot him to death. After all the drama that had happened, Nick holds a small funeral for Gatsby. He breaks his relationship with Jordan and flees to the Midwest to escape his contempt for the people around Gatsby, as well as the emptiness in his life and the moral degeneration of living among the wealthy on the East Coast. Nick claims that just as Daisy, Gatsby's dream was tainted by money and deception, the American dream of happiness and individualism has crumbled into the quest of wealth. That is all from me. Moving on to the next presenter.
Greetings to Doctor and everyone. My name is Cornelia Anting and my metric number is D2019108796. I will be presenting about the major issues that we found in The Great Gatsby and the conflict. One of the major themes in The Great Gatsby is the American dream. Jay Gatsby's life is an embodiment of the American dream, as he is a poor farm boy who changes his name and reinvents himself in order to become wealthy and successful, at least financially. His story is a jazz-age take on the classic rags to riches story, transitioning from a simple life where money is scarce to the riches and extravagance that become possible once money is acquired. The next one is power. Power is the central theme in The Great Gatsby and it is intertwined with the other themes. Daisy remains with Tom because of his power over her, despite his infidelity and knowledge of Jay's feelings for her. Daisy's position in society is inextricably linked to her identity as Tom Buchanan's wife. He also has the control over the money in their marriage, which gives him additional power over Daisy. Daisy, on the other hand, is more concerned with her social standing and status than with Jay or even herself. Tom is aware of his power and enjoys it because it gives him control, not only over Daisy, but also over Jay. Tom enjoys the fact that Jay wants Daisy but cannot have her. There is an external conflict that is portrayed in this novel, which is social stratification that includes old money, new money, and no money. Old money is the people who were born rich and wealthy. They don't have to work and they spend their time amusing themselves with whatever takes their fancy. New money are those people who have to work hard to be wealthy. Last but not least is the no money. They are people who works as a labor in mines in the Valley of Ashes and spend their days to make it out.
Good day to Doctor and my fellow classmates. So my name is Sharmita Shrimal Bhaganam and today I will be continuing the presentation with the theories related to the famous novel that we have chosen. That is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Based on the famous novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, we have analyzed two theories which we find to be very much relatable to this story. So the two theories that we find to be very much relatable to this story are psychoanalytic theory and Marxist theory. Based on the famous novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, we have analyzed two theories. So for the first one, the first theory is psychoanalytic theory. So what is psychoanalytic theory? According to Sigmund Freud, this psychoanalytic theory is basically, it helps to understand one's personality and also their personality development. So it also consists of three important conceptualized parts of the human personality, which includes ID, ego, and superego. So the ID is basically the desire that a person has, and the ego is the conscious part of the brain where a human is aware of it, and also it has the role where it fulfills the demands of ID in a very safe way. The superego is basically the conscience or judging part of the mind. So, in this story, we can see that the main character Jay Gatsby is very much related to this theory. The main character Jay Gatsby has always desired to show his richness, himself as a very wealthy person, and also he wants to always show that he is born rich. So, this is also very much obvious when he changed his real name, which was James Getz, just to hide his born poor identity. His only desire is to be seen as a rich person who is also born rich, and also to woo his ex-lover, who is called as Daisy, back then by showing his richness and wealth. Daisy is actually married already, but he just wanted to try to win over her back in his life. Based on this story, we can see that he had ego just when he became newly rich. He started throwing parties every day, flexing his money and richness. He also had superego. He has a mindset where he only mingles with rich people, and the greed to become rich has made him to even do illegal things in order for him to be rich. Thus, it is very obvious that the psychoanalytic theory is very much related to this story. Another theory that we have analyzed based on this story, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, is Marxist theory. Marxist theory is named after the founder's name, which is Karl Marx. In this Marxist theory, it focuses on four important aspects, which includes economic power, materialism versus spirituality, class conflict and art, literature and ideologies. This theory is very much related to the class system as well, or it is also known as capitalism. These class systems are divided into four, which includes the elite class, upper class, middle class, and lower middle class. We found this theory to be very much related to the Great Gatsby story because this story mainly divides the society into classes such as high class and low class. So, this is very much obvious in Tom Buchanan and Daisy's story. They were married to each other, but they were not in love. But they were married just to sustain their rich status, and also to show that they have maintained their status as a born rich or wealthy person. And even though Daisy did not love Tom Buchanan, she just got married to him just because he is rich. And also even though Daisy loved Jay Gatsby, she still married Tom Buchanan, and also she didn't marry Jay Gatsby because he was poor and he had nothing at that time. So as for Jay Gatsby, he wanted to be in that high class level just to portray himself as a rich person in order to woo and win over Daisy back in his life, and also to win over Daisy back from her husband Tom Buchanan. Another character, George, who owns a rundown garage in the Valley of Ashes, is married to Myrtle Wilson, who is an ambitious social climber. In this part, we can see that a poor gets to marry to another poor partner, and the rich partner gets to marry the rich one. So the class system is very much obvious in this story. Thus, in conclusion, we believe that the both theories, psychoanalytic theory and Marxist theory, are very much related to this story. Thank you.
Next, we move on to the justification on why psychoanalytic theory and Marxist theory are relevant in the novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. For the first one, the psychoanalytic theory. So for psychoanalytic theory, as has been mentioned before, it focuses more on the ID, the desires of a person, the ego, the conscious part of the brain that a person is aware of and is the one fulfilling the desire of a person, and the superego, the conscience, the jury, and the judge of a person's mind that they judge on if whether their actions are applicable or not. So, psychoanalytic theory, it is a critical literary theory that is used as a means to understand cultural texts, eliminating aspects of the text in connection to psychological states that are conflicting in nature. So, according to psychoanalysis, the unconsciousness is a storehouse of painful experience and emotions, wound, fears, guilty desires, and unresolved conflicts that one does not and want to know about because one feels overwhelmed by them. So, it is a dynamic entity that engages at the deepest level of being. So, why does this theory fit with the novel The Great Gatsby? So this theory fits in The Great Gatsby, in that its author, F. Scott Fitzgerald, built the characters in his books with all kinds of different personalities, problems, and outlooks in life that it becomes almost transparent for the readers to spot, even with them not knowing or having any sort of clues about psychoanalysis, and was just basing on their own experience with such kind of characters. So this justifies that the for example, we can take some example from the character of Nick Carraway. So Nick Carraway acts as the alleged viewpoints of the reader, as the stories are told through the Nick's own eyes, and his thoughts and perceptions shape and color the whole stories. So Nick suffers from what can be called as a superiority complex. So meaning that he has an exaggerated amount of feeling of self-confidence due to his own upbringing. So for context, Nick Carraway grew up extremely privileged, wealthy, and comfortable. Nick's father was a great contributor to his feelings of importance, reminding him countless times of how privileged he was. Moving on, Nick also suffers from having no sense of egocentrism. So egocentrism is meaning is an ability to view others' perspective and sympathize with them. So Nick has no sense of egocentrism, meaning he cannot relate to the common people or relate to others around him because of how privileged his living conditions were. So this can be seen by the fact that Nick barely reacts to the fact that Tom breaks Myrtle's nose during uh, his and Tom's trip to the city. Nick neglects to view the situation from Myrtle's viewpoints, as he himself views himself superior to Myrtle. So other characters in the story of The Great Gatsby also have their own personality, outlooks on life, and problems that they face that are very glaring throughout the stories, and can be further analyzed by the usage of the psychoanalytic theory, thus ensuring that this theory is very much justified to be used to analyze the story The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. That is all for psychoanalytic theory. Next, we move on to the Marxist theory. So, Marxism is a method of socio-economic analysis that utilizes a materialist interpretation of historical development, better known as historical materialism, to understand class relations and social conflict, as well as a dialectical perspective to view social transformation. Has been mentioned before, so Marxist theory, it involves more about the materialistic part of a cultural text, and it scans for the social status, the how the usage of the infrastructures of societies, and they use that to analyze a novel. So why does Marxist theory justified to be used to analyze The Great Gatsby. So, a Marxist approach to The Great Gatsby might be concerned with the representations of the social class and the way in which power and wealth are attained and retained by the characters. So, looking at the novel as a whole, it is seen to depict mostly the very wealthy, influential members of societies, such as Tom, Gatsby, Daisy, Nick Carraway, and other such characters. So, they are those who do not work and spend much of their time at leisure with their wealth. So there are some minor characters who are less wealthy, such as Buchanan and Myrtle, and a smaller number of servants and workers who are glimpsed working in the novel. So, a few examples can be taken from the life of Tom, Daisy, Nick, and Gatsby that acts as the consumers. So, they are those who do not work and just spend their time in leisure with wealth, according to Marxist theory. So, Tom and Daisy never work, and Tom is said to be extraordinarily rich. He was a footballer, but having retired from this at a very young age, is now very restless and diverts himself with acquiring commodities, reading racist texts, and his many affairs. Moving on to Nick, he's one of the less wealthy characters and works in the stock exchange, but is still financially secure as his family is economically stable enough to support him in his work. So Nick's occupation as a bondman is never described in detail. It involves trading in debt, which was a growing aspect of the economy at the time, enabling the boom in consumer spending, which supported the growth in manufacture. So this was a new type of stock trading at the time, and Nick has to learn about it himself. So we move on to Gatsby next. Gatsby is introduced at the height of his power and success, and is associated purely with pleasure and extravagantly expensive pursuits such as throwing parties, driving luxury cars, and going out in a hydroplane. However, we see hints of Gatsby's work in the secretive phone calls and references to gangster activities, and it becomes clear that his wealth is based on criminality. So, through the eyes of a Marxism, these people can be said to be the consumers. So they are what can be depicted in the novel as those who only spends their wealth and consume and do not do any works. Although we see hints of Gatsby's work, but he can be said to be the working upper class elites or something like that. So those who are in the lower level, or the workers, as can be taken example from as the Buchanan and perhaps Myrtle. So there are various other forms of materialist interpretation that can be garnered from the Great Gatsby, and it is the reason for why the Marxist theory conforms beautifully with the story. The author F. Scott Fitzgerald done the viewpoint of the struggles and infrastructures of the elites in the story beautifully, and is the reason why the Great Gatsby can be easily analyzed with the Marxist theory, thus hence the justification on why we can use Marxist theory in analyzing the Great Gatsby.